without further ado, I want to introduce my industry colleague, Carylann Assante, who is the CEO of SYTA, which is the Student and Youth Travel Association, and the SYTA Foundation. When IATDG began, Carylann and SYTA, as well as ABA, were the first to jump right in and support us as we were starting to grow and develop and just, kind of put our foot in the water. Ever since then, Carylann and SYTA have been amazing industry partners for us, and we're looking forward to partnering with SYTA on projects to come. Carylann, quite honestly, she doesn't know it, and she'll find out right now. As she's been, I've looked to her as a mentor as I've kind of navigated this association business in the tourism industry. So, but Carylann today has arranged a panel of industry, leading industry organization who was going to share how their own organizations have pivoted in response to the pandemic. And they're going to also share some ideas about how we can all work together to get back traveling again in later this year or in 2021. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Carylann. Thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you have an amazing conference today.
Thank you. I think we're ready to go. Thank you so much, Vaughn. And it's so wonderful to see so many of you saying hi to everybody and popping up on the screen, especially where you're located from. I'm actually talking with you from our SYTA offices, which are in Arlington, Virginia, right near Reagan National Airport. And to Vaughn's point, we wanted to jump right in and become a good partner to your organization, because we know that many of you are directly working with our students and our customers on the ground. And we know the important role that you play within the organization and within the travel sphere. I think the other word that Vaughn used was the word family. I think the silver lining that has come out of this pandemic is how closely we all are working together, how we all understand, I think, better the important role we play, and more importantly, that we want to help everybody through this period. I want to congratulate many of you on the call today, because I think you are investing in your own professional development and wanting to learn more, to learn about what's happening around you so that you could make really good decisions about your business moving forward. And that really is what we want to do today, is give you a macro view on what is happening in some specific industry sectors. We only have about 40 minutes or so, so there won't be live questions at the end, but what we will do is I do have some questions that were given to me, so we're going to try and answer those questions, and then certainly Vaughn and Karen have our contact information for after this session. So again, I want to introduce our panel and thank everybody for coming today. So we have Andrew Newhart, who is Director of Policy and Legislation from the American Bus Association. We have Paul DeMarco, who is President of Book My Group, and he is talking with us on behalf of the hotel industry. A really good friend that we've gotten to know one another, Reiner Jens, founder of the Family Travel Association, and we'll get to learn a little bit more about who they are. Leah Chandler, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Discover Puerto Rico, and that was actually where we had our last face-to-face meeting exactly a year ago this January, when COVID was a word that was just a blip on our horizon. So I'm happy to have Leah with us, talking with us a little bit about convention and visitors bureaus and how DMOs are responding. And then Alushka Ritchie, who is the president of the World Federation of Tourist Guide Associations. And I know that we have an international group, so I'm really happy that Alushka is joining us today. Now, I know we've had a pretty busy week here in the United States, and I wanted to start off with Andrew from the American Bus Association. Andrew, who leads their government relations efforts. I asked Andrew if he could, we're not talking about the election or anything political, but I think it's really important to take a pulse on where we are in with relation to some of the aid and the government programs that came out to support the travel industry. I feel like we were moving forward. We had, initial rounds of PPE, and then it sort of stopped with many things going on. But I wanted Andrew to give us an update on, briefly, where we are, and then how we may still, as an industry, work with allied associations to lobby for the aid and the things that we need. So Andrew, if you could speak to us on that, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. As you mentioned, we don't want to talk about, politics per se, but we were happy at ABA to see that after the election, both Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said they do want to come together and pass additional COVID stimulus. So we saw that as a positive sign because McConnell wasn't as involved before the election. So on our end, we're hopeful that they will come together and pass something else before the end of the 116th Congress, which they only have a couple weeks to do so that when they're in session. On ABA's perspective, we've been focused most of our efforts on the CERTS Act, which is the Coronavirus Economic Relief for Transportation Services Act, which would provide $10 billion in relief, not only for the motor coach industry, but for the school bus and the US flag passenger vessel industries. We have a ton of support in both the House and the Senate. We're up to 271 co-sponsors in the House and 60 in the Senate. And with that bill providing $10 billion for those three industries would be extremely helpful. So we've also worked hand in hand with US Travel Association and the Save Our Stages Act. And basically we want to make sure that Congress knows that the travel industry is important and they have been hit one of the hardest in the country, and that we really haven't seen enough aid. I know some of our members did receive some PPP funding, but that has been, long come and gone. So even if the CERTS Act doesn't make it into this additional package that they may do before the end of the year, we expect them to include additional PPP, which I think would be helpful for many of our members. But for folks on this call, we encourage you to contact your legislators if you have any relationships there, and let them know that, this isn't just a motor coach issue, but all of these travel industries kind of work hand in glove together. And if one goes down, the rest are suffering as well. So we're hopeful that as a group industry, we can come together and make something happen.
I know also that a part of it was immediately to look at infrastructure, which would speak to our airports and some of the other important parts of the travel industry as well.
Yeah, the airports did receive additional funding, and the airports and airlines, they always have the largest voice on the hill, so they seem to get the attention over some of our smaller folks. But obviously, it's an important industry when we're talking about travel. So, we want to lift all ships and make sure that we all get the help we need.
That's great. And I know, too, for many of you on the call, we depend on the motor coach market for coaches coming back. And I know that there have been a lot of challenges with a number of the motor coach companies. Can you speak to where your membership is today, in terms of businesses? Are you seeing people going out of business, or do you feel comfortable that, should we turn around for the spring and get not just students and adults moving, that will have the capacity available?
Sure. So we've seen several companies, big and small, go out of business from coronavirus. The biggest problem the motor coach companies had is they couldn't use the PPP funds to pay the leases on their coaches, which can be, $7,000 a coach per month. So for those small businesses that had 10 coaches in the parking lot that weren't moving and they weren't bringing in any revenue, that quickly ate up all of their capital. So we have seen some go out of business. We're hopeful that they can try to weather the storm, and that's why we're pushing the CERTS Act so hard, because we want that to be a bridge to when people do start traveling again, when a vaccine is more widely available, that there's going to be buses there to help people get around, not only for tour and travel, but we've been making the point with the crazy hurricane season, with the wildfires, those are the motor coaches that are helping folks get out of harm's way. So we are hopeful that, the majority of the industry will make it through this. I know we had our economists out of New York do a study that if we didn't pass the CERTS Act, 30 to 40% of the industry could go out of business. So we're hopeful that, in these next few weeks that we're able to get the funding that we need to keep those businesses open.
That's great. No, I think it's important for everyone to understand that there are many groups like ABA and others working together on our behalf. And I actually just learned that the national parks is looking to limit 9 people on a motor coach. That's 9 people on a motor coach. And so a number of allied groups are coming together again to work with the National Park Service to talk about how that's just not going to work for us to bring people back into the national park. So I thank you so much, Andrew. I know, Alushka, a lot has been happening on the international front. I think, you know, we've been reading in the news that there's another round and a lot of the destinations are shutting down again. Can you speak to, much like Andrew did about the US, to how countries are responding? And I know that there was some aid going out to others, you know, country by country, but more importantly, where you are in an international front right now with closings and things like that.
Thanks, Carylann. Yes, that's quite a broad question to answer. We are an international association and do have about 100 countries as members. But yes, we've had some of our members go into a second lockdown right now, and countries are responding differently. So, for example, we do have some who are still allowing tours under very strict protocols, of course. We mustn't forget that the protocols have been put in place by governments, but also within our sector as well. So as far as possible, us as the tourist guides are trying to follow those within our respective countries. So in most of the European destinations, our tourist guides have also been given a little bit of funding towards them as freelance tourist guides, and some of their businesses. We have, unfortunately, in some of the African countries, as well as in Asia, we have had some members who have not received funding as freelance guides are not acknowledged. So as we're moving forward in the second wave in some of our member countries, even with the protocols and physical distancing, we are following what they are telling us to do, but when there are no tourists, of course, it's no use having the protocols in place. So while we are following the different, what's happening in the different countries and with the protocols in place, we are struggling with what to actually understand within the respective cities. So although countries are in lockdown, cities are behaving in different ways, and our tourist guides are facing a little bit of a confusion in the future and how to move forward from this. But Carylann, at the end of the day, you know, we need those tourists to be able to put into place these protocols, and right now, under lockdown, there's no feet on the ground.
No, I appreciate that. Recently attended a WTTC conference online, and the word that they used quite a bit was how the travel industry had to be in alignment, that we all have to work together. As you said, there are different protocols by country. We have them here by state. Then we have local jurisdictions. So it does make it, you know, really challenging for us to understand how we can even bring groups back out and head towards recovery, you know, with that kind of response. You know, thinking about marketing and communications, when Leah and I were preparing for the session today, Leah Chandler, again, Chief Marketing Officer for Discover Puerto Rico, we wanted to get this perspective on how destinations are marketing and communicating with customers in light of constant change, and what is some of the messaging. We went from the early period of the COVID timeframe to a larger time frame right now, to where we're sort of changing the messaging and sounding like we're opening back up again. So Leah, can you speak to how, for example, you are marketing the destination and encouraging customers to come back to Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. It's, of course, like many destinations, I'm sure it's been a roller coaster, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we obviously were quite locked down. We were the first destination in the US to implement a curfew and mandatory mask wearing in public, thermographic camera imaging for temperature reads in the airport. So we took it very, very seriously and really worked to stop the influx of tourism. Because we're a US destination, we couldn't shut down our airports, and so people could technically still come, but from a marketing standpoint, we really worked to slow down the incoming passenger arrivals, because we had to protect our residents first and foremost. And I think, like many people, especially in the US, as we started to get into the summer months, it seemed that things were getting better, as many of us had implemented those lockdowns and lots of health and safety measures. And of course, as soon as things started to open up, we saw those big spikes and things shut back down again. So the name of the game for us has been agility, flexibility. I know we're all tired of hearing the word pivot, but that really has been, I mean, on about a 2-week basis, every 2 weeks, as new executive orders were coming out from our government, we were adjusting and adapting and trying to go with the flow. So we created messaging that sort of centered around this idea of time. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it was all in good time. You know, all in good time, we're going to welcome you back to the island. Sort of that when the time is right, when you're ready, we'll be ready. I know everybody's seen a lot of that messaging. And as we, you know, moved past the summer, getting into the fall, then it's time to book and it's time to plan. And that's sort of where we are now, where we are reopening this idea of visitation. We know that consumers are getting more and more confident about air travel. So we're looking at that future booking and future demand to really drive the winter traffic, which is our peak season. And when we fully open up with all of our messaging going full tilt, then it will be it's time. So again, it was really key for us to focus on a message that had some flexibility and had legs to kind of go backwards or forwards as we needed it to. And then, of course, the health and safety messaging has been really, really critical. We leaned into that very heavily at the beginning of the pandemic, and also as we saw surges in the summer, you know, reminding people to social distance, reminding people to wash their hands, educating people on the safety measures that were being put in place here in terms of reduced capacities in restaurants or reduced capacities in museums, et cetera. We, of course, did see that couldn't be our message forever. You know, we started to see after about a month of really hardcore health and safety messaging, our engagement rates started to drop. People started to stop following, you know, they stopped following a lot of our social media sites, that they wanted content that was going to inspire them and kind of give them hope, something to look forward to for the future. So I think after several months of this, you know, we have found a balance, and I think a lot of destinations are in that same space where health and safety has to continue to be an underlying message, but it's no longer the message that we're leading with.
I know that you've been traveling quite a bit and have started attending some trade shows. Can you talk a little bit about what segments you see coming back, for example? Or I think there was a meeting show, and there's, of course, the travel trade, but what are you seeing in terms of the kind of business that may be coming back to Puerto Rico first?
Well, definitely leisure is going to lead for us. We know that meetings and conventions is going to take a little bit more time, especially for those destinations that require air travel, or like many of the people here, bus travel for regional destinations. But leisure is going to be first. We're seeing people who want to come as couples. We're seeing very, you know, small groups. We're seeing a lot of workcationers, or the remote workers, the digital nomads, whatever you want to call them. A lot of people who are saying, you know what, we don't have to go into an office every day anymore. We can work from anywhere. Why not from, you know, Puerto Rico, from paradise, where we can have a view while we're sitting on Zoom calls all day. And we've got amazing short-term rental product here on the island, actually as many short-term rentals as we do hotel rooms. So people are looking for those spaces where they've got some autonomy. They're not in public spaces mixing with lots of people. They can cook their own food. They've got some privacy. So Puerto Rico has been a great destination for that. So those are some, you know, interesting trends we're seeing in the leisure space. Incentive trips have started to come back a little more quickly than what we're seeing from compared to MICE in the meeting and convention space. And just small groups, you know, small groups who are interested in this hybrid concept, where the majority of the people, I'd say 70 to 80% of their attendees, are going to come online virtually to consume content and be a part of the meeting. But 20 to 30% are willing to travel and want to start getting back out there. And I've seen that, especially in the last few weeks, as I've gone to a couple of conferences myself in the States. There's definitely a segment of the population that is ready to move on and are practicing all of the health and safety guidelines that have been recommended, and are doing it safely.
It's really interesting when you talked about thinking about the staycationers or the workstations. I know a friend, they're moving to Puerto Rico for a month, and thinking about our audience today, I was on a call with some of the very large tour operators, and they said that they're doing these smaller groups. It might be several families. They're doing customized tours. So it sounds like that even though it's a little more leisure, the incentive, there may still be opportunities for tour guides and those who specialize in certain destinations to think about that market for putting together local, more specialized tours for these pods of vacationers.
Absolutely. And I think, we're going to see for tour guides in Puerto Rico, the list of criteria is extensive to sort of recertify them with the Puerto Rican government and create a space where the visitors are going to be, feel confident and feel safe in the group tours. For us, the cruise industry is obviously huge in Puerto Rico. And as we've seen the no sail order be lifted and now this conditional sail order come into play, I think it's going to have an even bigger impact on how we are looking at tour guides on the island and how they're going to have to now not only comply with regulations here in Puerto Rico, but also from the cruise industry. So we certainly haven't got all the answers yet, but I think that's a component of the industry that's going to have to continue to be really heavily regulated, at least here on the island. That's what we're seeing.
Are you seeing the community of DMOs and CVBs working together? I know many of the guides and tour directors specialize in certain destinations, and so that's their community. Are you seeing what you're doing happening across other destinations, at least in terms of them messaging and helping bringing their community together to welcome, customers as they start to come back?
I think a lot of DMOs are trying to do that. Definitely, we all want to be doing that. The unfortunate thing that's happening right now in the DMO space is so many have been impacted from a staffing standpoint. We've seen huge DMOs across the state who, the states who have lost 70–80% of their staff during COVID because most of us are funded through tax receipts that come in from hotels. And as people stopped going to hotels, those collections decreased significantly and that funding stream for most of the DMOs dried up. So if you were not a DMO who was in a position to, you had reserves and you were in a position to be able to activate some of the savings maybe that you had been stockpiling, a lot of DMOs have found themselves in a time when they're needed most, not being able to activate the way they'd like to. Of course, in the state, tons of DMOs who do have staff still in place are leaning into those local audiences. How can we capitalize on the drive market? How can we help local restaurants, implementing a lot of takeout campaigns to help those local restaurants stay in business? So the ones who are still intact and in place are focusing on that regional and local market really, really heavily, and I think have come together in a strong way for sure.
That's great. That's what we've seen also, is that sense that shorter distances, getting to know, as you mentioned, that regional area will be really important for many of the cities coming back. I appreciate your sharing. I know how important it is for many of us to communicate effectively with our customers because we want to keep them thinking about travel, keep it inspirational, aspirational, but then also we know that many of the DMOs and CVBs have resources available through your websites and through your content that can help everyone communicate with their customers. So we appreciate that perspective. When you talked about some of the cities and the challenges with the hotels, I wanted to talk to Paul for a few minutes now and talk about, how he sees the hotel industry. I know that Book My Group works with a large number of the major brands and chains, and I think it'll be really important for the hotels to be back in many of those destinations. So Paul, would you share with us what you're seeing as we inch towards some recovery? And I am hearing about some groups coming back online. So Paul?
Thank you. Well, I don't think it's even remotely curious to say every hotel wants people back, whether they're open or they're not open. And if they're not open, they're trying to get open. So there's definitely an opportunity there. They're all held to whatever the local and state and federal guidelines are, obviously. And every brand out there also has their own new protocols towards health and safety. One of the biggest challenges we've seen is when a coach being, let's say, 50 guests. In most states, you can't meet with more than 25 people, so they wouldn't be able to have breakfast together. So we're having a little bit of a challenge with some of those rules. I think you'll see buffets a lot different in hotels, where the shared utensils is something that you won't see anymore. probably more plated meals versus a buffet. Hotels are also trying to be very accommodating to the groups. So my suggestion would be, if you have anything, even if you think it's really odd, ask it. We've had some groups ask to have no one else on the floor in their hotel, that they want to be the only group on us. In some of these hotels, at 10, 15, 20% occupancy, are like, sure, no problem. We'll give you your own floor. Obviously that won't hold moving forward, or hopefully it won't move, but they're definitely very accommodating. We're going to follow, hotels are going to follow every rule by the state, local, and then of course the brands have a lot to say about what they're going to do. Every brand has a protocol out there for how they're going to keep their hotels safe for everybody to come in. So they're open. The ones that are open want you back. The ones that aren't open can't open fast enough to get us back.
No, I appreciate that. I know that, for example, we just put out a resource guide for traveling with students, and we went to the American Hotel Motel Association, which at least came up with what were some baseline standards for booking hotels. And we know early on, Vaughn talked about, we're going to have to be flexible, and there's a lot of change. And I think to that point, the hotels want the business. I think we're going to have to do a little more pre-work in understanding what each hotel has to offer, and just knowing whether or not they're open, right? And working with the industry as to what those changes look like. I think some of the other things that we've had questions on, and I'm curious if you've seen it, is everything from handling luggage. They're talking about contactless luggage, but when you have seniors and adult groups, you still need to help them. Students that are traveling with instruments and large bags, from the coach companies to, is the driver supposed to take it off? I think, those are some of the things that I would imagine still have to be communicated by the hotels.
Absolutely. And again, every city destination has almost a different rule. Especially in the senior market, anything coming off the coach is almost touched by them, and then it's left, and then it has to be cleaned and then picked up and brought in. But every hotel out there will do whatever is necessary to get the business moving again. There's no one out there that's going to say, "Oh, we're not going to touch your bag." Believe me, we'll all do it, because they are going to follow whatever rules and requirements that are out there. You mentioned some of the student groups and the instruments. I wish we had that problem. 99% of
I'm praying if I say it, it'll happen.
99% of the festivals have been canceled, and it's horrible so for no other reason, get the kids moving again. That's critical. I mean, they want that. We also talked about the other day about the guides and what they can do. I mean, I think one of the most important things is be flexible and understanding as well, because you come in with what you need. They're going to try to accommodate to the best of their ability. Like I said, things like no shared utensils, and maybe a plated breakfast versus a buffet breakfast. That of course creates a problem for your time, because you have to get everybody at a certain time in there and then out at a certain time. We know that creates kind of a challenge for the tour side, but that's going to be helpful to understand that versus a flow, make it more of a hard start and stop. It certainly helps the hotels. But they're going to accommodate you and every request possible. So I don't think anything is unreasonable to ask, and every hotel will accommodate anything they possibly can.
Now, that's great to hear. I know that, as you were saying, and it's really important for those also on the call, again, that sense of working together to communicate and translate, and allowing the extra time to find out exactly what each property will be able to do. I know that, as I mentioned earlier, when we put our guide together, we went ahead and worked with all the different associations to come up with what were the foundation rules, whether it was motor coach and hotels and attractions. And again, all of us working together on standards and processes that will make it easy for customers, in the future to understand. I also heard some rumors that hotels might be a little more flexible with booking conditions and deposits, and it's a new world a little bit. So I think, again, there might be some opportunities.
I think the new clause that we're seeing is the COVID clause.
Okay.
And it goes from, some hotels right out of the blocks. A lot of the hotels understand clearly that, they're where the people are going to stay, but they also come to realize that, listen, if someone's going to stay in Virginia, they're going to DC. That's why they're there. So the rule it can't be their county says you can travel, but DC is still held to 25-person meetings. That kind of blows it all up. So the hotels have been extremely flexible for the most part, by being understanding and letting it say whether it's national, international, or local law that's preventing you from coming, we'll be understanding, and not trying to hurt the hotels. They're trying to survive as well, but everybody's trying to be as flexible as possible. And right out of the blocks, some were real rigid. No, if it isn't this reason, you can't cancel, whatever the case is. But most of them are backing off and look, we want to work with you guys too. What do we have to do to secure this? And if for whatever reason they can't travel due to a COVID-related issue, they're being pretty flexible. After we got that initial wave of deposits back, which was hurtful to everybody, but nobody really ever saw that coming. So it was a real tough challenge. But I think most of them, we did the right thing. We're back online, and they want the people back. So they're going to do whatever they can do to get them back.
That's great. And I know too, many of the hotels, to what Leah was mentioning, are offering. I even heard of hotels that are offering families to come and stay, and they can take advantage of hotel facilities, maybe while mom is working and the kids are in another activity. And speaking about families, we have Reiner with us, the founder of the Family Travel Association. And I asked Reiner to come on board with us today because from what the data seems to show, the family travel industry, family travel is coming back as families, Leah mentioned them traveling more together and creating their own groups. But I thought it might be interesting for this group, for Reiner to explain what makes up that family travel, and then are there some opportunities for the attendees on the call to participate in family travel and understand how they might be able to work with those groups. And thank you, Paul, so much for that insight on the hotels. It's an important part of what we do. And so
Sure.
Ryan,
Thanks, Carolann. Great to be here. I've heard the word family thrown around quite a bit, and I always perk up when I hear that. Maybe you all don't know, but at least the most recent statistics, meaning last year and in 2018 as well, about 1 in every 3 trips, leisure trips, that was taken by Americans included a child, 17 or younger. And in terms of how we define family travel, there's so many different variations of what a family group is. Basically, we look at it as traveling with another family member, particularly one that's 17 or younger. That's what we ultimately as an organization want to do. We want to inspire and empower these families with children to travel more and to help them discover what's possible. So that's what our organization does. And we do that, by the way, through bringing together the industry professionals as a kind of a coalition to help communicate and help consumers understand what their options are, what they're able to do. We look at best practices. We work with travel advisors on certifying them, which ones are truly knowledgeable about how to work with traveling families. We do a lot of research, as I mentioned. We provide networking opportunities, just like any good association would. But it's been, we're only 6 years old. We're kind of the new kid on the block, if you will. Part of an industry that has many established and very successful associations. But again, when you consider about 1 in every 3 trips is taken with a child 17 or younger, that's a pretty significant market. And when COVID first hit, we wanted to provide our members with resources and anything that they could use to help them kind of through this rough period. And it was encouraging to kind of look back even at 9/11 and see what kind of happened there. And yes, as we now know, family travel bounced back pretty quickly. Why? Because people really appreciate and value family bonds and spending time together with their children and loved ones. That becomes much more important in people's lives. So that's very refreshing to see. And if you have any questions as to families' resilience to get out on the road and start traveling again, did anyone try getting an RV this summer? You would have had a hard time. They were full. Vacation rentals. I know Myrtle Beach and the Carolina coastline had record numbers this summer. You could hardly get them. Yes, it's all focused on domestic travel, but families can be resilient. They want to get away. And as a couple have mentioned, there are these pods of families that are now traveling together, and there are workations that are happening, but also schoolcations where children are, and some resorts have started marketing their services to attract families who might have children who could learn remotely from these various locations. So a lot of really interesting things are kind of developing. Our members are, some of which are certainly on the forefront of that. But I think ultimately the message is that, you know, families are starting to come back, mostly domestic, as is generally true with the population. But they're excited and anxious too. And the key word is going to be trust. Now, I think that is true for most organizations, particularly in this travel industry. Do they trust the supplier? Do they trust their travel advisor to give them the right recommendations? Do they trust their friends to give them feedback on what it was like to fly for the first time since COVID? Trust is a big issue, and will be for the time being as people slowly start to get back into the game. And the airlines, I think, at least in terms of opening up travel to a broader scope of destinations, really are in the lead on that in terms of bringing back that consumer confidence.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I think what we've all learned is that during this period, we may have to look for new segments. We've had to be more innovative, more creative, and what family travel is doing when we talk about those opportunities, and many of them have the funds to have these customized experiences, and there may be additional opportunities for those on the call today to get more involved, excuse me, from that perspective. So I appreciate that, Reiner. As we wrap up the session, I know that you all have a very busy time. Our goal was just to give you an inside view on some of the different industry perspectives, what is happening in the industry. I really appreciate Alushka for coming on. I know that she'll be participating and sharing, you know, what guides are doing internationally. And, you know, as an industry, we really appreciate all that you do. Many of you I know are from the student travel industry, and again, we appreciate your participation. We are getting some calls, we are getting some proposals out there. So I think between family, student travel, we're slowly starting to see that recovery. So thank you, Vaughn and Karen, for this opportunity to let us come in and give you a bit of a perspective. And we hope you all have a terrific conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carylann. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of you panelists for jumping in and sharing this information about the industry and about how it'll impact their role as tour directors and guides and destination experience operators. So thank you so much for that.